I never used to be paranoid. I've spent years on the road, driving from state to state in my RV, capturing the raw beauty of America through my camera lens. Cities, deserts, forests. I've seen it all. And I never thought twice about camping alone until that night at Timber Ridge. It was late October, and the campground was almost deserted. I had driven up from Portland that morning, eager for a quiet weekend in Oregon's backcountry. Timber Ridge was one of those places that felt untouched, nestled deep in the woods, far from the noise of civilization. It was exactly what I needed. I pulled into the campground and chose a secluded spot near the tree line, a perfect place to unwind. By sunset, the air had a bite to it, the kind that signaled winter wasn't far off. I made a simple dinner, just a can of chili and some toast, then settled into my RV with a beer and my laptop. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, the occasional rustling of leaves the only sound. It was peaceful, safe, until the knock. It was soft at first, so quiet that I wasn't even sure I'd heard it. I paused my show, listening. Another knock, a little louder this time. My stomach tightened. I hadn't seen another person since I'd arrived. There were a few other RVs parked further down the campground, but they weren't close, and no one had any reason to be at my door this late at night. I stood slowly, heart hammering. The peephole was useless. It was too dark outside to see anything clearly, just vague shapes shifting beyond the door. Then a voice, a man's voice. "Hey, sorry to bother you." The words were polite, but something about the tone set my nerves on edge. "My car broke down just up the road. Can I use your phone to call for help?" I didn't respond right away. My phone was right on the counter. I could have opened the door, handed it to him, and been done with it, but something in my gut told me not to. I cleared my throat. "Where's your car?" "Just a little ways up." A hesitation. I didn't see any other campers awake, so I thought I'd try here first. That was a lie. There were at least 2 other RVs closer to the road than mine. If his car had really broken down, why not go to one of them? Why hike all the way back here? I swallowed hard. "Sorry, man, can't help you." Silence. Too long of a silence. Then, "You sure?" The voice was lower now, almost pleading. "It's freezing out here, man. I just need a quick call." A prickling sensation crawled up my spine. I glanced around the RV, my mind racing. I had locked the door, hadn't I? My fingers twitched toward the latch, just to be sure. "You should try one of the other RVs," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I might be awake. Another pause. Then, in a voice too calm, too deliberate, "You're not being very friendly." Every hair on my body stood on end. I took a step back from the door, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Then the handle moved. Not a knock this time. A slow, deliberate testing of the lock. A metallic rattle, like fingers gripping and twisting. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, my flashlight. It wasn't much, but it was solid metal, heavy enough to do some damage if I had to. "Back off," I snapped. "I'm not helping you." The rattling stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a loud thud against the door. I nearly dropped the flashlight. My heart slammed into my ribs. Another thud, harder this time, shaking the entire RV. He was trying to force his way in. I stumbled back, my mind screaming at me to do something. Call 911? Try to escape? But before I could decide, the door burst open, slamming against the wall, and he was there. Tall, broad-shouldered, a hood pulled over his face, obscuring his features. But I could see the tattoos on his neck, the glint of something metallic in his hand. I didn't think, I just reacted. I swung the flashlight with everything I had, connecting with his shoulder. He grunted, stumbling back, but didn't fall. His hand shot out, grabbing my wrist in a vice-like grip. I struggled, twisting, kicking, trying to break free. He was stronger. Panic surged through me. Then, I saw it. The kitchen knife. It was just a few feet away, sitting on the counter where I had left it after making dinner. With all my strength, I wrenched my arm free and lunged. My fingers closed around the handle and I turned, slashing blindly. I didn't know if I hit him, but it was enough to make him recoil. He cursed, backing toward the door, his face half shuttered in the dim light. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. Then, without another word, he turned and bolted into the night. I didn't waste time. I lunged for the door and slammed it shut, locking it tight. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip my phone as I dialed 911 and 11. The police arrived 20 minutes later. By then, he was long gone. They found footprints in the dirt outside, leading into the woods, but no sign of him. No sign of his broken-down car. I packed up and left at first light. I never stayed at Timber Ridge again. And I never camped alone after that. I've always thought of myself as cautious, careful. I do my research, I check reviews, I never take unnecessary risks, especially when I'm traveling alone. But after hearing about what happened to that photographer in Timber Ridge, Daniel, I think his name was, I started questioning if I was as prepared as I believed. He wasn't some clueless tourist, he was an experienced traveler, just like me. And yet, someone had still tried to force their way into his RV in the dead of night. I read his account online a few days before I left for Montana, and even though I told myself it was just an isolated incident, I packed an extra lock for my door. Just in case. Black Pine Creek was exactly the kind of place I sought out. Remote, but not abandoned. Surrounded by thick woods with only a handful of RVs spread across the grounds. It was off-season, so most of the summer tourists had gone home, leaving the place eerily quiet. Perfect for writing. Perfect for capturing the beauty of the wilderness. Perfect for being alone. I arrived late in the afternoon, picked a spot near the edge of the tree line, and set up camp. I had no neighbors close by, just the way I liked it. As the sun dipped below the pines, I settled into my usual routine, cooking dinner, editing photos, and jotting down notes for my blog. The air had that crisp autumn bite to it, and inside my RV, it was warm and comfortable. Safe. Then, I saw it. A shadow. At first I thought it was nothing, just a tree swaying in the wind, or maybe an animal moving past the window, but something about it seemed wrong. Too steady. Too deliberate. I froze, knife in hand, hovering over the cutting board. The shadow shifted slightly, and I realized it wasn't moving with the trees, it was standing still, watching. I turned off the stove, my heart beginning to pound. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was another camper walking back to their site. Maybe they'd gotten lost. But why would they stop right outside my window? I moved slowly to the front of the RV, careful not to make a sound. I didn't want to open the door. Didn't even want to pull back the curtain. Instead, I stood there, listening. Nothing. I exhaled, forcing myself to relax. Probably just my imagination. The way the moonlight filtered through the trees could play tricks on the eyes. I shook my head, grabbed my wine glass, and returned to the table. I had work to do. Then came the knock. A single, soft tap on the side of the RV. Not the door, not a window, the side. I nearly dropped my glass. My throat tightened. No one knocks on the side of an RV. I sat there, paralyzed, waiting. The air inside felt stifling, too thick to breathe. Tap, tap, tap. Rhythmic, deliberate. Rhythmic, undeliberate. I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the table. Maybe it was a branch. Maybe the wind had picked up. But the trees weren't moving. The knocking continued. I stood, every nerve in my body screaming at me to do something. Anything. But what? Open the door and confront whoever was outside? Call the police? There was no signal out here. I was completely cut off. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the knocking stopped. I waited, my heart pounding against my ribs. I strained my ears for any sound, any movement, but all I could hear was the quiet hum of my own breath. I moved toward the window, hesitated, then slowly peeled back the curtain, just an inch. Nothing. No shadow, no figure, no sign that anyone had been there at all. I let out a shaky breath, shaking my head. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe Daniel's story had gotten to me more than I realized. I grabbed my flashlight, took a deep breath, and, against my better judgment, opened the door. Cold air rushed inside. The woods were silent, still. I shone the flashlight in the direction of where the shadow had been, but there was nothing there, just trees and empty space. Then I heard it. A scraping sound, like a knife dragging against metal. My stomach clenched. It was coming from the other side of the RV. I turned slowly, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. A shape darted away, just out of view. My breath hitched in my throat. Someone was there. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands shaking. I backed away, gripping the flashlight like a weapon, listening. Then, glass shattering, a sharp, violent crash from the back of the RV. I barely had time to react. My mind raced. If they were trying to break in through the window, I had seconds, maybe less, before they got inside. I grabbed the remote for my alarm system. I'd never had to use it before, but the second my finger hit the panic button, a deafening siren filled the RV. The effect was immediate. I heard footsteps retreating, fast. A figure bolted past the front window, disappearing into the trees. The alarm kept blaring, piercing through the silence of the campground. I didn't move. Couldn't. I just stood there, gripping the remote, waiting. Minutes passed, then an hour. No more movement. No more sounds. By the time the sun rose, my nerves were shot. I packed up and left without hesitation, never once looking back at Black Pine Creek. I don't know who was outside my RV that night. I don't know what they wanted, and I don't ever want to find out. I kept telling myself I needed to stop reading these stories. First, Daniel's account of the break-in at Timber Ridge, then Mia's terrifying encounter at Black Pine Creek. Both of them had been alone. Both had experienced something that couldn't be easily explained away, and both had barely escaped without something worse happening. I told myself it was all coincidence, that bad things happen everywhere, and that just because two people had horrifying experiences while camping alone didn't mean it was some kind of pattern. But still, the stories lingered. The details clawed at the back of my mind, and yet, despite all that, I still pulled my RV into Crescent Hollow, a small, isolated campground deep in the Colorado mountains, looking for a quiet place to unwind. I had been traveling for months, chasing the best autumn landscapes for my photography. The deeper into the season it got, the fewer campers I saw on the road, which was exactly how I liked it. Crescent Hollow was a hidden gem miles away from the nearest town, surrounded by towering pines, with a lake so still it looked like glass. There were only a few RVs here, none of them close to mine, and by the time the sun dipped below the trees, I was completely alone. I made a simple dinner, checked my phone, no service, and curled up with a book. The solitude was comforting at first. No noisy campers, no distractions, just the sound of wind through the trees. But as the night wore on, I started feeling it. That creeping unease. The same one I had felt when I read Daniel's and Mia's stories. The kind that makes you question whether you're actually alone. Sometime after midnight, I woke up suddenly. Something wasn't right. The air inside the RV felt different, stifling, like the space around me had changed while I was asleep. I lay there, heart pounding, listening, and then I heard it, a slow, deliberate scraping sound against the RV door, metal on metal, not the wind, not an animal. Someone was outside. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The sound continued, steady and unhurried, as if whoever was out there wasn't in a hurry to get inside. I'd reached for my phone before remembering no signal. Then the footsteps. Soft at first, crunching over dead leaves, moving around the perimeter of the RV. They stopped just outside my window. I held my breath. Through the thin fabric of the curtains, I saw it, a tall, unmoving shadow. It just stood there, watching. The air in my lungs felt like ice. My pulse pounded so loudly I was sure whoever was outside could hear it. And then the door handle rattled. Gently at first, testing. I forced myself to sit up, gripping the heavy flashlight on the nightstand. My other hand hovered over my knife. Another rattle, harder this time. Then a sudden snap. The lock gave way, the door swung open, slamming into the wall. A man stood in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothes. His face was partially hidden beneath the shadow of a baseball cap. He didn't say a word, didn't hesitate. He stepped inside. I reacted before I could think. I lunged for the flashlight and swung, hard, smashing it into his arm. He grunted, stumbling back, but he didn't fall. He was reaching for something. Something in his pocket. A weapon? I didn't wait to find out. I swung again, catching him in the side of the face. This time he staggered, one hand shooting up to his jaw. Then, without a word, he bolted. He turned and ran into the night, disappearing into the trees. I scrambled to the door and slammed it shut. Locking it again. My entire body was shaking. My breath came in short, panicked bursts as I backed away, gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles ached. I waited, listening, but the night was still. Was he really gone? Or was he still out there, watching? I didn't sleep. At dawn, I packed up and left Crescent Hollow without looking back. The police later searched the area but found nothing. No footprints. No evidence that anyone had been there at all. I tried to convince myself that I had scared him off before he could do anything worse. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't just been looking for an easy target. That he had been waiting, and that, maybe, I had just barely escaped. After what happened to Liam at Crescent Hollow, I told myself I should take a break from camping alone. The stories were starting to feel too real. Daniel, Mia, Liam. All of them had been in their RVs, isolated, thinking they were safe, until they weren't. I wasn't the superstitious type, but even I couldn't deny that the pattern was unsettling. Still, I needed the quiet, and that's why I found myself at Red Cedar Grove, tucked away in the thick forests of Washington, ignoring the nagging voice in the back of my head that told me I was making a mistake. I arrived just before sunset, the air crisp with the first signs of winter creeping in. Red Cedar Grove wasn't a tourist-heavy campground, it was more of a forgotten place, a relic from another time. The kind of place locals knew about but never visited. It had only a handful of campsites spread far apart, and when I pulled in, I realized I was completely alone. Perfect. I set up my RV in a spot near the edge of the woods, the massive cedars towering above like silent guardians. As I made dinner, I let myself relax. It was easy to forget the stories when you were surrounded by this kind of beauty. The isolation was comforting in a way, like the world had shrunk down to just me and the trees. The wind whispered through the branches, a soothing sound that made my eyelids heavy. I cleaned up, locked the door, double-checked the windows, and crawled into bed. Then, sometime after midnight, I woke up. I wasn't sure why at first. The RV was silent, no movement, no sounds. But something felt off. The kind of feeling you get when someone is standing behind you, watching. I held my breath, listening, and then I heard it. A whisper, low, faint, just outside the RV. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. The whispering was so soft, so deliberate, that for a moment I thought I was imagining it. But then I heard it again. Olivia, my name. I sat up too fast, my heart slamming against my ribs. Someone was outside. I reached for my phone, but my hands were shaking. There was no signal here, not surprising. I always told myself it was a blessing to disconnect, but right now, it felt like a death sentence. The whisper came again, circling the RV. Olivia, let me in. The words weren't frantic, weren't angry. They were gentle, like a lover calling from the dark. Like someone who already knew I would say yes. I forced myself to move, sliding out of bed as quietly as possible. My feet barely made a sound against the floor as I grabbed my flashlight. My breath came in short bursts, my pulse roaring in my ears. The whispering shifted, moving toward the door. Knuckles dragged across the metal, slow, methodical. Let me in. I flicked on the flashlight and aimed it toward the window, but the moment the beam hit the glass, the whispering stopped. Everything was silent. I stood frozen, listening. The air in the RV was thick, too still, like the world outside had stopped moving. Then, something even worse. The click of the door lock. I had locked it. I knew I had locked it. But now, it was unlocked. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. My fingers tightened around the flashlight. The whispering didn't come back, but I could feel something just beyond the door, waiting. I lunged forward and locked it again, my hands fumbling over the latch. My body was trembling so violently I could barely stand. And then, just outside the window, a voice. "You locked it! Good!" I screamed. I scrambled back, crashing into the tiny table. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows across the walls. I didn't dare look at the window. I didn't want to see what was out there. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, gripping a knife in one hand and the flashlight in the other. I never heard another whisper, never saw a shadow move past the window, but I could feel it. When dawn finally broke, I packed up and left. I didn't care that I had only planned to stay another 2 nights. I didn't care that it was probably some sick prank, because when I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key, I glanced in the side mirror, and I saw it. Standing at the edge of the trees, watching me. A figure, tall, lean, not moving, not coming closer, just smiling. I hit the gas and didn't stop until I was miles away. I never went back to Red Cedar Grove, never spoke about it. But even now, years later, sometimes in the dead of night, I wake up to a whisper at my window, and every time it says the same thing. Olivia, let me in. I've read too many of these stories now. Daniel's break-in at Timber Ridge, Mia's encounter with the shadow at Black Pine Creek, Liam fighting off an intruder at Crescent Hollow, Olivia hearing whispers in the dead of night at Red Cedar Grove. Every story a warning, every camper thinking they were alone, every one of them realizing too late that they weren't. The part that scared me the most, none of them could explain what happened. I told myself I wasn't like them. I wasn't paranoid, I wasn't afraid, but then I found myself at Ravenwood Trail, and now I understand why they never went back. It was the most remote place I had ever camped. Tucked deep into the Wyoming wilderness, miles from anything. No towns, no gas stations, no phone service. That was the appeal. I wanted solitude. The kind you couldn't fake, the kind you only found when the nearest human was too far away to help you. The air was cold that night, crisp with the promise of early winter, and my RV was the only one in the entire campground. Perfect. I made dinner, sat by the fire for a while, then climbed into bed, leaving one window cracked open for the fresh mountain air. The night was silent. No distant voices, no traffic, just the wind through the trees. And then, at some point in the early morning hours, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling the RV. I woke up instantly, pulse hammering. I held my breath, listening. It was too quiet out there, the kind of silence that didn't feel empty, but waiting. I slid out of bed carefully, keeping low. The steps moved again, crunching softly over the dirt. I grabbed my flashlight and hesitated by the window. I didn't want to look. I knew I wouldn't see anything. That was the worst part. I could feel it. I flicked on the light and aimed it outside. Nothing, no movement, no figures in the dark, just trees. I exhaled, feeling foolish, and turned off the light. Maybe a deer, maybe my mind playing tricks on me. Then the footsteps started again, closer this time. I swung the flashlight back to the ground. Still nothing. But then, a footprint, fresh, deep in the dirt, right outside my door. But no one standing there. A chill ran through me. I moved the beam to the left. Another footprint, then another. Leading toward my RV, but none leading away. The steps had just appeared. My heart started pounding. I slammed the window shut and locked it. Something was out there, something that wasn't showing itself. Then came the knock, soft, gentle, like it was testing me. 3 taps, then silence. I stood frozen, staring at the door. My breath was coming too fast. My mind raced through possibilities. An animal? A prank? But I already knew it wasn't. I had been out here all day. I had seen no one. And there were no cars. I forced myself to speak. "Who's there?" No answer. I grabbed my knife from the counter, gripping it so tightly my knuckles ached. Then, the radio turned on. A burst of static filled the RV, crackling so loudly I nearly dropped the knife. The dial turned by itself, shifting through stations. Then, a voice, distorted, warped by static. "Don't open it." Every hair on my body stood on end. I spun around, staring at the radio, heart slamming against my ribs. The knob clicked back into place. The static died. Silence. I took a step backward, my legs barely holding me up. My eyes darted to the door, then to the window, and then I saw it. The footprints were gone. The ground outside was untouched, like no one had ever been there. But I heard them. I saw them. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat there, knife in one hand, flashlight in the other, waiting for another knock, another sound, another sign that I wasn't losing my mind. But nothing else happened. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the trees, I was already behind the wheel, my hands trembling as I turned the key. But as I pulled away from Ravenwood Trail, I made the mistake of looking in my rearview mirror. And I saw him, a man, standing just beyond the tree line, not moving, not chasing, just watching. His face was too far away to make out, his clothes were dark, blending into the shadows. His clothes were dark, but his head tilted slightly, like he knew I was looking. Like he had been waiting for me to see him. I tore my eyes away and hit the gas, speeding down the winding road until the trees swallowed the campground behind me. I never told anyone, not because I didn't think they'd believe me, but because I knew they would. After reading Ethan's account of Ravenwood Trail, I was done pretending, done believing these stories were just coincidence. They weren't. Something was happening, something beyond reason, a pattern, a force. Something lurking in the places we convinced ourselves were empty. Ethan saw footprints that weren't supposed to be there. Olivia heard a whisper that knew her name. Liam fought someone who disappeared without a trace. And well, I've seen things too, I just never talked about them. Until now. Hollow Point Camp, the place I swore I'd never return to. I was a cop for 23 years. I've been in dangerous situations, seen the kind of violence most people only hear about on the news. I know what humans are capable of, and that's why I don't scare easy. But what happened that night? It wasn't human. It was late September, just as the summer crowds had vanished, leaving the roads empty and the campgrounds quiet. I had been driving through Arizona, looking for a place to settle for a few days. Hollow Point was remote, sitting at the base of a dry, craggy mountain range, the kind of place where you could go days without seeing another person. That was fine by me, I wasn't looking for company. I arrived in the afternoon, set up camp near the tree line, and spent the evening watching the sky fade from gold to deep violet. Everything was peaceful, normal. By 10 p.m., I was in bed, listening to the hum of the wind outside, feeling safe. Then, just after midnight, I heard the voice. "Help me." Faint, distant, I sat up, listening. The words had come from somewhere outside, carried on the wind. My first instinct was that it was another camper. Maybe someone had wandered too far from their site, gotten lost. "Help me." This time, the voice was closer. I slid out of bed and grabbed my flashlight, my pulse quickening. No one should have been out here. I had seen maybe 2 other campers on my way in, and they were parked near the entrance, at least a mile away. I moved toward the door, gripping the handle. "Help me!" Right outside. I froze. Every instinct I had from my years on the force screamed at me to stop, to think, to listen. Something was wrong. I didn't open the door. Instead, I moved to the window, peeling back the curtain just enough to see outside. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing. No one was there. The trees stood still. The dirt road was empty. But I knew what I heard. I swallowed hard, heart pounding. Maybe someone had fallen, crawled into the brush, out of sight. I took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and stepped outside. The air was dead still. I swept my flashlight back and forth. The dirt around my RV was undisturbed. No footprints. No signs that anyone had been here. And then, a whisper. Right behind me. "Help me!" I spun around, flashlight shaking in my grip. Nothing. The wind picked up suddenly, swirling dust into the air. My skin crawled. I backed toward the RV, my instincts screaming at me to get inside. I slammed the door, locked it, grabbed my gun. I wasn't playing this game. Then, the whisper came again. This time, it was inside. I whipped around so fast I nearly lost my balance, my gun raised. The RV was empty. But I knew what I had heard. I checked every corner, every cabinet, under the table, nothing. Then, the worst sound yet, the door unlocking, slow, click, click, click. I lunged for it, but it swung open before I could grab it. A gust of freezing air rushed inside, and standing just beyond the door, a man. Thin, dressed in old ragged clothes, his face wrong. Not blurred, not distorted, but like my eyes couldn't focus on it. And then, it vanished, just blinked out of existence, like he had never been there at all. I don't remember slamming the door, don't remember locking it, but suddenly, I was sitting at my table, gun still in my hands, heart beating so hard I thought I might pass out. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I forced myself outside, and that's when I saw them. Footprints, leading to my RV, but none leading away. I packed up and left without looking back. I don't tell this story, not because I think people won't believe me, but because I know some of them will. If there's one thing I've learned from these 6 stories, it's this: we are never as alone as we think we are. Whether it's a stranger in the dead of night, something lurking just outside our vision, or a force we can't explain, danger doesn't always announce itself with a scream. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it waits, and sometimes it's already inside before we even realize the door was open. Daniel, Mia, Liam, Olivia, Ethan, and Jared all thought they were safe. They had experience, instincts, and precautions in place. But the truth is, when you're isolated, miles away from help, you are vulnerable. These stories aren't just ghost tales or campfire horror, they are warnings. So if you camp alone, travel in an RV, or find yourself drawn to the quiet places most people avoid, here's what I need you to remember. Always trust your gut. Every single person in these stories felt something was wrong before things escalated. If you ever get that feeling, the prickling at the back of your neck, the sudden unease, the sense that something is off, listen to it. Lock your doors, double-check them, and if something seems different, a door unlocked that you swore you locked, a window open that should be closed, leave. Don't wait for answers. Keep a weapon or a defense tool nearby, a flashlight, a knife, an alarm, anything that gives you time to react. Daniel's knife saved him. Mia's alarm scared her intruder away. Liam's flashlight gave him the seconds he needed to fight back. Be prepared. If you hear something strange, don't investigate. Whispers in the night, footsteps outside, a soft knock, don't open the door. Olivia and Ethan both learned this the hard way. Whatever is out there wants you to open that door. Don't ever assume you're truly alone. Jared heard a voice. It got closer. Then it was inside. And in the morning, the footprints only went one way, toward him. What these stories tell us isn't just that the woods are dangerous or that monsters, human or otherwise, exist. They remind us that when we seek solitude, something else might be seeking us too. So, if you still plan to travel alone, if you crave the quiet and the untouched places, just remember this: someone or something might already be there, watching. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the eerie, the unexplained, and the terrifying. If you've ever experienced something unsettling while camping or traveling alone, I want to hear about it. Share your story in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with others who crave the darkness as much as we do. And as always, from the depths of Enigma of the Unknown, thank you for unlocking another terrifying tale with me. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and whatever you do, don't open the door.